Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes. And you can learn more about my offerings on my website, illuminating-souls.com. Thank you so much for finding your way here. It truly is a blessing and an honor to get to spend this time with you. This podcast is infused with divine love that is being calibrated for you through your beautiful angelic team. So this is your time to cozy on up and snuggle in whatever way speaks to your heart, so that you can get some good rest. So I invite you to take a big, deep breath in and release as the love of your angels flows to you now. To get started with tonight's episode, I was guided to pull some angel cards for us. So this is an oracle card reading for our family here, which you are a part of. So I pulled 3 cards from the deck Healing with the Angels. And it's such a sweet reading. So the first card is Divine Guidance. And this is a reflection that you are deepening with your own divine guidance. Our divine guidance can feel very differently than our streams of intellect. Divine guidance almost comes in as a full breath, as a knowingness that is here to help us on our path, whereas streams of intellectual knowing tend to be more linear. Divine guidance can feel expansive and abstract and wonderful. And then that card is followed by healing. And we are always on a continuum of healing. If I were to ask you right now, what is up for healing for you? You likely would be able to come up with something that is in the process of transformation or healing or upliftment for you. If I dwell on that question for myself, I certainly have material that is coming up for me that is ready to be transformed and healed. So we start off with divine guidance and healing. The third card is harmony. Harmony. Just feel into that beautiful word. Feel it as an invitation. So if we're looking at divine guidance, healing, and harmony, it is the angel's way of letting you know that they are bringing waves of light and love to you to support you in coming into deeper harmony, heart and soul. That you don't even need to know what is up for healing. You might, but you don't have to know, because the angels know the truth of your heart. They know all that is transpiring for you, and they come to you with compassion, empathy, love, and understanding, and especially waves of harmony. We are, after all, vibrational beings, and we respond to the harmonics of this realm. I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity to have a sound bath or listen to singing bowls, but there are frequencies, harmonics, that can shift our energies. My first experience of this was at a workshop that was presented by a spiritual teacher that I really loved at the time. And she was doing healing work on each one of us, and it involved a beautiful crystal and tuning forks. So that was my first experience with sound healing. And the person working with her brought the tuning forks over each of our crown chakras. And I felt tingles, and I felt clearing, and I didn't know what was happening. All I knew was it felt exquisite. It felt like an invitation, like something was opening, and I was receiving the divine flow. And so, even though you might not audibly hear the harmonics right now, vibrationally, they are flowing to you to help bring you into vibrational alignment, which will help you as you move forward on your path of light. We are influenced by the harmonics around us all the time. Yes, we've all had those experiences. Well, here you are experiencing harmonics of the positive sort, of the sort that will lift you up, that will help you remember that you were born with etheric wings, wings of light, that will help you rise above whatever is being presented on the earth plane, so that you have more altitude, so that it is easier for you to ascertain how to move forward, or how to stay in stillness for a while longer. All of it is divine in nature. So I'm going to invite you to take a big, deep breath in, allowing the light to flow to you now. And I'm going to call in the angels who are already here. And I'm going to take a deep breath in with you as I open my heart. And beautiful angels on high, I feel your presence here already, but I ask you to join us, each one of us. I ask that you bring forward waves of love, of healing, and of light to support us on our journeys, each of us on a unique path. And we know that you know where we are right now. Angels, I ask that you bring forward waves of goodness, of inspiration, and of support to help each one of us blossom open into the brighter frequencies that are here for us. I ask that you lift any doubt, any worry, any fear, especially that which is unneeded and unnecessary. And we ask that you assist us and opening to brighter tomorrows, to vibrant, beautiful experiences that bring us into closer harmony with our authentic self and our beautiful communities of light who meet us where we are. So, dear ones, just take a nice deep breath in and release. The angels want you to know that they are with you, that they hear your prayers. They feel the truth of your heart, and they are supporting you. So take a deep breath in and allow the waves of love to flow over you. Imagine, if you will, that the room you are in is being filled with a beautiful pink light that is filled with love that has been calibrated just for you. And this love is rippling throughout your space, benefiting everyone who is here with you, whether they are in another room or whether they're far away, just rippling this love to all whom you love. And then rippling beyond, so that everyone benefits from this moment of love with your angels. And just breathe into the beauty of this moment. That as you bring the angelic love into your heart, others are supported by this wave as well. And in doing so, we co-create a ripple of love in this world. You know, as we do this, I'm reminded of something I used to do when I first learned about the light in this way. I was still working in my corporate job, and it was a big office building, and there was a coffee shop in our building. And the line would get pretty long in the morning, as you can imagine. So on the mornings, I would go down to get a cup of coffee, and I would be at the end of the line. I would call in the light, and then I would go through the line with each person in my mind's eye. And I would ask the angels to bring forth a blessing for them. Angels, bring them a blessing today. May something wonderful happen to them. I would say that in consciousness. And then I would move on to the next person. And angels, bring them a beautiful blessing today. May something wonderful happen for them. And I would go through the line. And I don't know, that just delighted me. This idea that we can bestow requests for blessings upon each other. What a gorgeous ripple. What a beautiful way to work with harmony. So right now, that's what I'm doing. I'm asking the angels, bring our beloved here blessings, and may something wonderful happen to you in the next day or so and beyond. May a moment of serendipity find you. May something magical happen for you. May you have a spark of inspiration that opens your heart and helps you see clearly a next step you can take. So just breathe in. And you receive this magical fairy dust, this beautiful light that is coming to you now. And you need not worry if you're feeling it or not. It's still there. right? There's many things in the world that we cannot perceive, but we know that it is there. And the love of your angels falls into that. Sometimes we do get to see it in an act of kindness, yes, when we have a moment that is beautiful and unexpected, or even a moment that is ordinary, but you feel that it is special somehow. My husband has a habit of getting so excited when he finds a penny on the ground. He will stop anywhere and pick up that penny because it feels magical to him. And then I, of course, feel the ripple of his delight. You know, as empaths, I think we so often focus on the part of that empathy that's hard because we can feel the sorrows and the challenges of others. But you know what? We can also feel their delight. We can feel their joy. We can feel the beauty of a moment. So, in this moment, let's call in the beauty of other moments. Let's feel the ripple of goodness that is flowing through to us now, as the angels remind us that this is a beautiful time to open to the light and the joy and the goodness of our lives. Just breathe and open and feel the prayers of your angels flowing to you now. They are holding for you. They are holding with you. They are amplifying your prayers. And they are saying prayers on your behalf. Prayers that have a beautiful vibrational tapestry that help weave into the brightness of your experiences in life. And just now they are also bringing to you beautiful waves of love to help you rest and relax, that you have permission to drift off and get a good night's rest. You have done enough for today. And tomorrow will come soon enough. For now, you just rest and allow your body to relax and restore. And your angels are watching over you and will take good care of you. And I'm wishing you sweet and lovely dreams. And while you drift off, I'm going to tell you a story. We're going to be together for about an hour here, so you have plenty of time. And so, my beautiful friends, tonight I thought we could return to A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And this is part 10. We have just gotten to the good part. This is my favorite part of the book. I'll try to do a quick summary, but my summaries are very rambling, which, considering hopefully you're getting ready to fall asleep, may not be a bad thing. So here is my rambling synopsis of where we are right now. So sweet little Sarah Crewe was sent by her father, Ralph Crewe, to Miss Minchin's seminary for young women. So they had lived in India, but as was the time, this was the colonial time of India, where the British were ruling, and as was the time that children were sent to boarding schools in London. Now, Sarah's father was very wealthy and dashing, and he He spoiled Sarah, but Sarah was not a child to be spoiled. She was kind and empathic and generous. And so she was given the best of everything. And Captain Crew wound up going into business with his best friend over some diamond mines. And it appeared to be that this was a bad investment. And he lost his fortune, and he also got very sick and sadly dies. So now our precious little Sarah is an orphan, a penniless orphan at that. And Miss Minchin demotes her from prized student to a servant. She banishes Sarah to live in the attic next to Becky, the scullery maid. And Sarah then has a very, very hard life because Miss Minchin is miserly and miserable and mean-spirited. And Sarah does her best to make the best out of every day. She lives in her imagination, so she is known for telling her stories. And the house next door to them has been vacant for some time. And she dreams that someone will move in and they will have someone who comes to the attic that she can meet, and that's what happens. Turns out that a man from India moves next door who is very sickly, and he has a servant named Ram Dass. And one day, our little Sarah sees Ram Dass out of the attic window, and there's a pet monkey who escapes and comes to meet Sarah. And that's how Sarah meets Ram Dass. So, in the meanwhile, the diamond mines have actually turned out to produce diamonds. And there is a vast fortune waiting for Sarah. And the gentleman from India, his name is Mr. Carrisford. And he was Captain Crew's best friend who led him into this investment. And he has gotten very sick. He is depressed, and he is sad, and he feels guilty, and he spares nothing in investing and attempting to find poor Sarah, because so much of the fortune he has belongs to her. So here you have Mr. Carrisford living right next door to the little girl he is seeking, but does not know it. And Ram Dass tells him about Sarah, the servant girl in the attic, not as the girl that they will be looking for, but just as a little girl who could use some magic and some help. So they decide to bring to Sarah warm bedding and meals, and to decorate her room, and to make sure she's cared for. And Sarah feels like this has happened through magic because she believes in magic. And just when you think you're in the worst thing, that the magic shows up. And then one day a package is delivered, and it is clothing, stockings and a hat and an umbrella and a coat for Sarah. And it comes with a mysterious note stating that she has a friend, a benefactor, who will be sending more for her. And Miss Minchin thinks, I wonder if Sarah has a rich bachelor uncle somewhere. I better not treat her so poorly. So she allows Sarah to take her place again at the table and in the classroom. In the meanwhile, Mr. Carrisford's lawyer is going to Moscow to try and find Sarah. So it's definitely a story about serendipity and chance meetings. And not that this has anything to do with a little princess, but as I was getting ready to record this episode, I was thinking about, when things are closer than we know. And there's this wonderful song that Liza Minnelli sings called Ring Them Bells. And it's written by Kander and Ebb. And it's about a woman who's searching for love. And she takes a trip to Europe, and she meets a man who winds up living in the apartment next door from her in New York. And it's a brilliant, joyful, robust song. So It has nothing to do with a little princess other than a shared theme of you never know who's living next door to you. But if you want to pick up your spirits tomorrow, I invite you to search for Ring Them Bells with Liza Minnelli, and it will lift your heart and make you smile. But for now, we are returning to our sweet Sarah, who is in her attic apartment with her friend Becky, who's the scullery maid. And Sarah, being sweet Sarah, is sharing all of her largesse, her goodness, her magic with Becky. So this is where we're going to resume. So we're picking up right after the clothing has been delivered to Sarah. And Miss Minchin tells Sarah to go and put on the new clothing and then come down to the schoolroom. And all of the other girls are stunned when Sarah comes in, no longer in rags, but in fine clothing. So this is where we're picking up. Sarah broke in Miss Minchin's deep voice. "Come and sit here." And while the whole schoolroom stared and pushed with elbows and scarcely made any effort to conceal its excited curiosity, Sarah went to her old seat of honor and bent her head over her books. That night when she went to her room after she and Becky had eaten their supper, she sat and looked at the fire seriously for a long time. "Are you making something up in your head, miss?" Becky inquired with respectful softness. Because this is what Sarah often did. She would look far away when she was making up a story, and this is what Becky is asking about. When Sarah sat in silence and looked into the coals with dreaming eyes, it generally meant that she was making a new story. But this time she was not, and she shook her head. "No," she answered. "I am wondering what I ought to do." Becky stared, still respectfully. She was filled with something approaching reverence for everything Sarah did and said. "I can't help thinking about my friend," Sarah explained. "If he wants to keep himself a secret, it would be very rude to try and find out who he is. But I do so want him to know how thankful I am to him, and how happy he has made me. Anyone who is kind wants to know when people have been made happy. They care for that more than for being thanked. I do wish." She stopped short because her eyes at that instant fell upon something standing on a table in a corner. It was something she had found in the room when she came up to it only 2 days before. It was a little writing case fitted with paper and envelopes and pens and ink. "Oh," she exclaimed, "why did I not think of that before?" She rose and went to the corner and brought the case back to the fire. "I can write to him," she said joyfully, "and leave it on the table. Then perhaps the person who takes the things away will take it too. I won't ask him for anything. He won't mind my thanking him, I feel sure." So she wrote a note, and this is what she said. "I hope you will not think it is impolite that I should write you this note when you wish to keep yourself a secret. Please believe I do not mean to be impolite or try to find out anything at all. Only I want to thank you for being so kind to me, so heavenly kind, and making everything like a fairy story. I am so grateful to you, and I am so happy, and so is Becky. Becky feels just as thankful as I do. It is all just as beautiful and wonderful to her as it is to me. We used to be so lonely and cold and hungry, and now, oh, just think what you have done for us. Please let me say just these words. It seems as if I ought to say them. Thank you, thank you, thank you." The little girl in the attic. The next morning she left this on the little table, and in the evening it had been taken away with the other things. So she knew the magician had received it, and she was happier for the thought. She was reading one of her new books to Becky just before they went to their respective beds, when her attention was attracted by a sound at the skylight. When she looked up from her page, she saw that Becky had heard the sound also, as she had turned her head to look and was listening rather nervously. "Something's there, miss," she whispered. "Yes," said Sarah slowly. "It sounds rather like a cat trying to get in." She left her chair and went to the skylight. It was a queer little sound she heard, like a soft scratching. She suddenly remembered something and laughed. She remembered a quaint little intruder who had made his way into the attic once before. She had seen him that very afternoon, sitting sadly on a table before a window in the Indian gentleman's house. "Suppose," she whispered in pleased excitement, "just suppose it was the monkey who got away again. Oh, I wish it was." She climbed on a chair very cautiously, raised the skylight, and peeped out. It had been snowing all day, and on the snow, quite near her, crouched a tiny shivering figure whose small black face wrinkled itself piteously at the sight of her. "It is the monkey," she cried out. "He has crept out of the Lasker's attic and saw the light." Becky ran to her side. "Are you going to let him in, miss?" she said. "Yes," Sarah answered joyfully. "It's too cold for monkeys to be out. They're delicate. I'll coax him in." She put a hand out, delicately speaking in a coaxing voice, as she spoke to the sparrows and to Melchizedek, as if she were some friendly little animal herself. "Come along, monkey darling," she said. "I won't hurt you." He knew she would not hurt him. He knew it before she laid her soft, caressing little paw on him and drew him towards her. He had felt human love in the slim brown hands of Ram Dass, and he felt it in hers. He let her lift him through the skylight, and when he found himself in her arms, he cuddled up to her breast and looked up to her in her face. Nice monkey," she crooned, kissing his funny head. "Oh, I do love little animal things." He was evidently glad to get to the fire, and when she sat down and held him on her knee, he looked from her to Becky with mingled interest and appreciation. "He is plain-looking, miss, isn't he?" said Becky. "He looks like a very ugly baby," laughed Sarah. "I beg your pardon, monkey, but I am glad you are not a baby. Your mother couldn't be proud of you, and no one would dare say you looked like any of your relations. Oh, I do like you." She leaned back in her chair and reflected. "Perhaps he's sorry he's so ugly," she said, "and it's always on his mind. I wonder if he has a mind. Monkey, my love, have you a mind?" But the monkey only put up a tiny paw and scratched his head. "What shall you do with him?" Becky asked. "I shall let him sleep with me tonight, and then take him back to the Indian gentleman tomorrow. I am going to take you back, monkey, but you must go. You ought to be fondest of your own family, and I'm not a real relation." And when she went to bed, she made him a nest at her feet, and he curled up and slept there as if he were a baby, and much pleased with his quarters. The next afternoon, 3 members of the large family sat in the Indian gentleman's library, doing their best to cheer him up. They had been allowed to come in to perform this office because he had specially invited them. He had been living in a state of suspense for some time, and today he was waiting for a certain event very anxiously. This event was the return of Mr. Carmichael from Moscow. His stay there had been prolonged from week to week. On his first arrival there, he had not been able satisfactorily to trace the family he had gone in search of. When he felt at last sure that he had found them and had gone to their house, he had been told that they were absent on a journey. His efforts to reach them had been unavailing, so he had decided to remain in Moscow until their return. Mr. Carrisford sat in his reclining chair, and Janet sat on the floor beside him. He was very fond of Janet. Nora had found a footstool, and Donald was astride the rug. "Don't chirrup so loud, Donald," Janet said. "When you come to cheer an ill person, you don't cheer him up at the top of your voice. Perhaps cheering up is too loud, Mr. Carrisford," turning to the Indian gentleman. But he only patted her shoulder. "No, it isn't," he answered, "and it keeps me from thinking too much." "I am going to be quiet," Donald shouted. "We'll all be as quiet as mice." "Mice don't make a noise like that," said Janet. "A whole lot of mice might," he said cheerfully. 1,000 mice might. "I don't believe 50,000 mice would," said Janet severely, "and we have to be as quiet as one mouse." Mr. Carrisford laughed and patted her shoulder again. "Papa won't be very long now," she said. "May we talk about the lost little girl?" "I don't think I could talk much about anything else just now," the Indian gentleman answered, knitting his forehead with a tired look. "We like her so much," said Nora. "We call her the little unfairy princess." "Why?" the Indian gentleman inquired. "Because the fancies of the large family always made him forget things a little." It was Janet who answered. "It is because, though she is not exactly a fairy, she will be so rich when she is found that she will be like a princess in a fairy tale. We called her the fairy princess at first, but it didn't quite suit." "Is it true," said Nora, "that her papa gave all his money to a friend to put in a mine that had diamonds in it, and then the friend thought he had lost it all, and ran away because he felt as if he were a robber?" "But he wasn't really, you know," put in Janet hastily. The Indian gentleman took a hold of her hand quickly. "No, he wasn't really," he said. "I am sorry for the friend," Janet said. "I can't help it. He didn't mean to do it, and it would break his heart. I am sure it would break his heart." "You are an understanding little woman, Janet," the Indian gentleman said, and he held her hand close. "Did you tell Mr. Carrisford," Donald shouted again, "about the little girl who isn't a beggar? Did you tell him she has nice new clothes? Perhaps she's been found by someone when she was lost." "There's a cab," exclaimed Janet. "It's stopping before the door. It is Papa." And they all ran to the windows to look out. "Yes, it's Papa," Donald proclaimed, "but there's no little girl." All three of them fled from the room and tumbled into the hall. It was in this way that they always welcomed their father. They were heard to be jumping up and down, clapping their hands, and being caught up and kissed. Mr. Carrisford made an effort to rise and sank back again. "It is no use," he said. "What a wreck I am." Mr. Carmichael's voice approached the door. "No, children," he was saying. "You may come in after I have talked to Mr. Carrisford. Go and play with Ram Dass." Then the door opened and he came in. He looked rosier than ever and brought an atmosphere of freshness and health with him. But his eyes were disappointed and anxious as they met the invalid's look of eager question, even as they grasped each other's hands. "What news?" Mr. Carrisford asked. "The child, the Russian people adopted?" "She is not the child we are looking for. She is much younger than Captain Crew's little girl. Her name is Emily Carew. I have seen and talked to her. The Russians were able to give me every detail." How wearied and miserable the Indian gentleman looked. His hand dropped from Mr. Carmichael's. "Then the search has to be begun over again," he said. "That is all. Please sit down." Mr. Carmichael took a seat. Somehow he had gradually grown fond of this unhappy man. He was himself so well and happy and so surrounded by cheerfulness and love that desolation and broken health seemed pitiful, unbearable things. If there had been the sound of just one gay little high-pitched voice in the house, it would have been so much less forlorn. And that a man should be compelled to carry about in his breast the thought that he had seemed to wrong and desert a child was not a thing one could face. "Come, come," he said in his cheery voice. "We'll find her yet." "Yes, we must begin at once. No time must be lost," Mr. Carrisford fretted. "Have you any new suggestion to make, any whatsoever?" Mr. Carmichael felt rather restless, and he rose and began to pace the room with a thoughtful, though uncertain face. "Well, perhaps," he said, "I don't know what it may be worth. The fact is, an idea occurred to me as I was thinking the thing over in the train on the journey from Dover. What was it? If she is alive, if she is somewhere. Yes, she is somewhere. We have searched the schools in Paris. Let us give up Paris and begin in London. That was my idea, to search London." "There are schools enough in London," said Mr. Carrisford. Then he slightly started, roused by a recollection. "By the way, there is one next door." "Then we will begin there. We cannot begin nearer than next door." "No," said Carrisford. "There is a child there who interests me, but she is not a pupil, and she is a little dark forlorn creature, as unlike poor Crewe as a child could be." Perhaps the magic was at work again at that very moment, the beautiful magic. It really seemed as if it might be so. What was it that brought Ram Dass into the room, even as his master spoke, salaaming respectfully, but with a scarcely concealed touch of excitement in his dark, flashing eyes? "Sahib," he said, "the child herself has come, the child the Sahib felt pity for. She brings back the monkey who had again run away to her attic under the roof. I have asked that she remain. It was my thought that it would please the Sahib to see and speak with her." "Who is she?" inquired Mr. Carmichael. "God knows," Mr. Carrisford answered. "She is the child I spoke of, a little drudge at the school." He waved his hand to Ram Dass and addressed him. "Yes, I should like to see her. Go and bring her in." Then he turned to Mr. Carmichael. "While you have been away," he explained, "I have been desperate. The days were so dark and long. Ram Dass told me of this child's miseries, and together we invented a romantic plan to help her. I suppose it was a childish thing to do, but it gave me something to plan and think of. Without the help of an agile, soft-footed Oriental like Ram Dass, however, it could not have been done." Then Sarah came into the room. She carried the monkey in her arms, and he evidently did not intend to part from her if it could be helped. He was clinging to her and chattering, and the interesting excitement of finding herself in the Indian gentleman's room had brought a flush to Sarah's cheeks. "Your monkey ran away again," she said in her pretty voice. "He came to my garret window last night, and I took him in because it was so cold. I would have brought him back if it had not been so late. I knew you were ill and might not like to be disturbed." The Indian gentleman's hollow eyes dwelt on her with curious interest. "That was very thoughtful of you." Sarah looked towards Ram Dass, who stood near the door. "Shall I give him to the Lascar?" she asked. "How do you know he's a Lascar?" said the Indian gentleman, smiling a little. "Oh, I know Lascars," Sarah said, handing over the reluctant monkey. "I was born in India." The Indian gentleman sat upright so suddenly, and with such a change of expression, that she was for a moment quite startled. "You were born in India?" he exclaimed. "Were you? Come here." And he held out his hand. Sarah went to him and laid her hand on his, as he seemed to want to take it. She stood still, and her green-gray eyes met his. Something seemed to be the matter with him. "You live next door?" he demanded. "Yes, I live in Miss Minchin's seminary." "But you are not one of her pupils?" A strange little smile hovered about Sarah's mouth. She hesitated for a moment. "I don't think I know what I am," she replied. "Why not?" "At first I was a pupil and a parlor boarder, but now—" "You were a pupil? What are you now?" A queer little sad smile was on Sarah's lips again. "I sleep in the attic next to the scullery maid," she said. "I run errands for the cook. I do anything she tells me, and I teach the little ones their lessons." "Question her, Carmichael," said Mr. Carrisford, sinking back as if he had lost his strength. "Question her, I cannot." The big, kind father of the large family knew how to question little girls. Sarah realized how much practice he had when he spoke to her in his nice, encouraging voice. "What do you mean by 'at first,' my child?" he inquired. "When I was first taken there by my papa." "Where is your papa?" "He died," said Sarah, very quietly. "He lost all his money, and there was none left for me. There was no one to take care of me or to pay Miss Minchin." "Carmichael," the Indian gentleman cried out loudly. "Carmichael!" "We must not frighten her," Mr. Carmichael said aside to him in a quick, low voice. And he added aloud to Sarah, "So you were sent up to the attic and made into a little drudge. That was about it, wasn't it?" "There was no one to take care of me," said Sarah. "There was no money. I belonged to nobody." "How did your father lose his money?" the Indian gentleman broke in breathlessly. "He did not lose it himself," Sarah answered, wondering still more each moment. "He had a friend he was very fond of. He was very fond of him. It was his friend who took his money. He trusted his friend too much." The Indian gentleman's breath came more quickly. "The friend might have meant to do no harm," he said. "It might have happened through a mistake." Sarah did not know how unrelenting her quiet young voice sounded as she answered. If she had known, she would surely have tried to soften it for the Indian gentleman's sake. "The suffering was just as bad for my papa," she said. "It killed him." "What was your father's name?" the Indian gentleman said. "Tell me." "His name was Ralph Crewe," Sarah answered, feeling startled. "Captain Crewe. He died in India." The haggard face contracted and Ram Dass sprang to his master's side. "Carmichael," the invalid gasped. "It is the child, the child." For a moment Sarah thought he was going to die. Ram Dass poured out drops from a bottle and held them to his lips. Sarah stood near, trembling a little. She looked in a bewildered way at Mr. Carmichael. "What child am I?" she faltered. "He was your father's friend," Mr. Carmichael answered her. "Don't be frightened. We have been looking for you for 2 years. Sarah put her hand up to her forehead and her mouth trembled. She spoke as if she were in a dream. "And I was at Miss Minchin's all the while," she half whispered, "just on the other side of the wall." Chapter 18. I Tried Not to Be. It was pretty comfortable, Mrs. Carmichael, who explained everything. She was sent for at once and came across the square to take Sarah into her warm arms and made clear to her all that had happened. The excitement of the totally unexpected discovery had been temporarily almost overpowering to Mr. Carrisford in his weak condition. "Upon my word," he said faintly to Mr. Carmichael, when it was suggested that the little girl should go into another room, "I feel as if I do not want to lose sight of her." "I will take care of her," Janet said, "and Mama will come in a few minutes." And it was Janet who led her away. "We are so glad you are found," she said. "You don't know how glad we are that you are found." Donald stood with his hands in his pockets and gazed at Sarah with reflecting and self-reproachful eyes. "If I had just asked what your name was when I gave you my 6pence, he said, "you would have told me it was Sarah Crewe, and then you would have been found in a minute." Then Mrs. Carmichael came in. She looked very much moved, and suddenly took Sarah in her arms and kissed her. "You look bewildered, poor child," she said, "and it is not to be wondered at." Sarah could only think of one thing. "Was he," she said, with a glance toward the closed door of the library, "was he the wicked friend? Oh, do tell me." Mrs. Carmichael was crying as she kissed her again. She felt as if she ought to be kissed very often, because she had not been kissed for so long. "He was not wicked, my dear," she answered. "He did not really lose your papa's money. He only thought he had lost it. And because he loved him so much, his grief made him so ill that for a time he was not in his right mind. He almost died of brain fever, and long before he began to recover, your poor papa was dead." "And he did not know where to find me," murmured Sarah. "And I was so near." Somehow she could not forget that she had been so near. "He believed you were in school in France," Mrs. Carmichael explained, "and he was continually misled by false clues. He has looked for you everywhere. When he saw you pass by looking so sad and neglected, he did not dream that you were his poor friend's child. But because you were a little girl too, he felt sorry for you and wanted to make you happier. And he told Ram Dass to climb into your attic window and try to make you comfortable." Sarah gave a start of joy. Her whole look changed. "Did Ram Dass bring the things?" she cried out. "Did he tell Ram Dass to do it? Did he make that dream come true?" "Yes, my dear, yes. He is kind and good, and he was sorry for you for little lost Sarah Crewe's sake." The library door opened, and Mr. Carmichael appeared, calling Sarah to him with a gesture. "Mr. Carrisford is better already," he said. "He wants you to come to him." Sarah did not wait. When the Indian gentleman looked at her as she entered, he saw that her face was all alight. She went and stood before his chair with her hands clasped together against her breast. "You sent the things to me," she said in a joyful, emotional little voice. "The beautiful, beautiful things? You sent them." "Yes, poor dear child, I did," he answered her. He was weak and broken with long illness and trouble, but he looked at her with the look she remembered in her father's eyes, that look of loving her and wanting to take her in his arms. It made her kneel down by him, just as she used to kneel by her father when they were the dearest of friends and loves in the world. "Then it is you who are my friend," she said. "It is you who are my friend." And she dropped her face on his thin hand and kissed it again and again. "The man will be himself again in 3 weeks," Mr. Carmichael said aside to his wife. "Look at his face already." In fact, he did look changed. Here was the little missus, and he had his new things to think of and plan for already. In the first place, there was Miss Minchin. She must be interviewed and told of the change which had taken place in the fortunes of her pupil. Sarah was not to return to the seminary at all. The Indian gentleman was very determined upon that point. She must remain where she was, and Mr. Carmichael should go and see Miss Minchin himself. "I am glad I need not go back," said Sarah. "She will be very angry. She does not like me, though perhaps it is my fault because I do not like her." But oddly enough, Miss Minchin made it unnecessary for Mr. Carmichael to go to her by actually coming in search of her pupil herself. She had wanted Sarah for something, and on inquiry had heard an astonishing thing. One of the housemaids had seen her steal out of the area with something hidden under her cloak, and had also seen her go up the steps of the next door and enter the house. "What does she mean?" cried Miss Minchin to Miss Amelia. "I don't know, I'm sure, sister," answered Miss Amelia, "unless she has made friends with him because he has lived in India. It would just be like her to thrust herself upon him and try to gain his sympathies in some impertinent fashion," said Miss Minchin. "She must have been in the house for 2 hours. I will not allow such presumption. I shall go and inquire into the matter and apologize for her intrusion." Sarah was sitting on a footstool close to Mr. Carrisford's knee and listening to some of the things he felt it necessary to try to explain to her when Ram Dass announced the visitor's arrival. Sarah rose involuntarily and became rather pale, but Mr. Carrisford saw that she stood quietly and showed none of the ordinary signs of a child terror. Miss Minchin entered the room with a sternly dignified manner. She was correctly and well-dressed and rigidly polite. "I am sorry to disturb Mr. Carrisford," she said, "but I have explanations to make. I am Miss Minchin, the proprietress of the young ladies' seminary next door." The Indian gentleman looked at her for a moment in silent scrutiny. He was a man who had naturally a rather hot temper, and he did not wish it to get too much the better of him. "So you are Miss Minchin," he said. "I am, sir." "In that case," the Indian gentleman replied, "you have arrived at the right time. My solicitor, Mr. Carmichael, was just on the point of going to see you." Mr. Carmichael bowed slightly, and Miss Minchin looked from him to Mr. Carrisford in amazement. "Your solicitor," she said, "I do not understand. I have come here as a matter of duty. I have just discovered that you have been intruded upon through the forwardness of one of my pupils, a charity pupil." I came to explain that she intruded without my knowledge. She turned upon Sarah. "Go home at once," she commanded indignantly. "You shall be severely punished. Go home at once." The Indian gentleman drew Sarah to his side and patted her head. "She is not going." Miss Minchin felt rather as if she must be losing her senses. "Not going," she repeated. "No," said Mr. Carrisford. "She is not going home, if you give your house that name. Her home for the future will be with me." Miss Minchin fell back in amazed indignation. "With you? With you, sir? What does this mean?" "Kindly explain the matter, Carmichael," said the Indian gentleman, "and get it over as quickly as possible." And he made Sarah sit down again and held her hands in his, which was another trick of her papa's. Then Mr. Carmichael explained in the quiet, level-toned, steady manner of a man who knew his subject and all its legal significance, which was a thing Miss Minchin understood as a businesswoman and did not enjoy. "Mr. Carrisford, madam," he said, "was an intimate friend of the late Captain Crewe. He was his partner in certain large investments. The fortune which Captain Crewe supposedly he had lost has been recovered and is now in Mr. Carrisford's hands." "The fortune!" cried Miss Minchin, and she really lost color as she uttered the exclamation. "Sarah's fortune?" "It will be Sarah's fortune," replied Mr. Carmichael rather coldly. "It is Sarah's fortune now, in fact. Certain events have increased it enormously. The diamond mines have retrieved themselves." "The diamond mines!" Miss Minchin gasped out. If this was true, nothing so horrible, she felt, had ever happened to her since she was born. The diamond mines, Mr. Carmichael repeated, and he could not help adding with a rather sly, unlawyer-like smile, "There are not many princesses, Miss Minchin, who are richer than your little charity pupil Sarah Crewe will be. Mr. Carrisford has been searching for her for nearly 2 years. He has found her at last, and he will keep her." After which he asked Miss Minchin to sit down while he explained matters to her fully, and went into such detail as was necessary to make it quite clear to her that Sarah's future was an assured one, and that what had seemed to be lost was to be restored to her tenfold. Also that she had in Mr. Carrisford a guardian as well as a friend. Miss Minchin was not a clever woman, and in her excitement she was silly enough to make one desperate effort to regain what she could not help seeing that she had lost through her worldly folly. "He found her under my care," she protested. "I have done everything for her. But for me, she should have starved in the streets." Here the Indian gentleman lost his temper. "As to starving in the streets," he said, "she might have starved more comfortably there than in your attic." "Captain Crewe left her in my charge," Miss Minchin argued. "She must return to it until she is of age. She can be a parlor boarder again. She must finish her education. The law will interfere on my behalf." "Come, come, Miss Minchin," Mr. Carmichael interposed. "The law will do nothing of the sort. If Sarah herself wishes to return to you, I dare say Mr. Carrisford might not refuse to allow it. But that rests with Sarah." "Then," said Miss Minchin, "I appeal to Sarah. I have not spoiled you, perhaps," she said awkwardly to the little girl, "but you know that your papa was pleased with your progress, and I've always been fond of you." Sarah's green-gray eyes fixed themselves on her with the quiet, clear look that Miss Minchin particularly disliked. "Have you, Miss Minchin?" she said. "I did not know that." Miss Minchin reddened and drew herself up. "You ought to have known it," she said, "but children, unfortunately, never know what is best for them. Amelia and I always say you are the cleverest child in the school. Will you not do your duty to your poor papa and come home with me?" Sarah took a step toward her and stood still. She was thinking of the day when she had told that she belonged to nobody and was in danger of being turned into the street. She was thinking of the cold, hungry hours she had spent alone with Emily and Melchizedek in the attic. She looked Miss Minchin steadily in the face. "You know why I will not go home with you, Miss Minchin," she said. "You know quite well." A hot flash showed itself on Miss Minchin's hard, angry face. "You will never see your companions again," she began. "I will see that Ermengarde and Lottie are kept away." Mr. Carmichael stopped her with polite firmness. "Excuse me," he said. "She will see anyone she wishes to see. The parents of Miss Crewe's fellow pupils are not likely to refuse her invitations to visit her at her guardian's house. Mr. Carrisford will attend to that." All right, you guys. Isn't that good? We still have a little bit more to read, but we'll finish that up in another episode. But they found her. They found Sarah. And Miss Minchin is getting her comeuppance. It's an awesome way to wrap up the book. And we do still have a little more, but we'll finish it up later. For now, I wish you sweet dreams and lots of love. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.